The morning after Martha's murder, Michael was, according to the report, going nuts over all the police presence over at the Moxley house. Michael told his chauffeur that he had done something very bad and that he needed to get out of the country. As memorialized in the Sutton report, when it came to Martha's murder, quote, even his own father has conceded that Michael could be capable of this, end quote. Good morning, you guys. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess Cannell. We are currently going through this book, Ask Not by Maureen Callahan. It tells the stories of the Kennedys and the women whose lives they destroyed. This is episode 11 of what will probably be 19 episodes total. Before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to let y'all know I've been thinking more about Pamela Kelly, which was the last episode. And I just wanted to say, I don't think it's that she didn't deserve to be in the book or something, because the truth is, my complaint was that I felt like her chapter and her details were almost entirely preventable. And that felt a little bit out of place. But the more I've thought about it, a lot of these women had very preventable choices. Now, I think actually today, this one is an example of one that was 100% not her fault. But I think, Jack's infidelity, entirely foreseeable. JFK's thrill-seeking, everybody already knew it. It's a known quantity. When Carolyn starts dating him, this is a known trait. Ted's kind of petulance and childishness and inability to take responsibility and inability to face reality, those things were known. So I think I've kind of been scolding myself a little bit, like maybe actually that's not the measure on which a woman should or shouldn't be included. So I'm sure you guys will let me know your thoughts. I have loved the comments. I feel like so blessed, like somehow I've ended up with the best community of commenters and people who are interested in the story. And so I'm just so grateful for you guys, and I'm loving those comments. So please, if you have not checked out the comment section, after we get through the video, just going through the story, and people bring links and they share additional reading and they theorize or give more color to the story. So it's been so fun, and I love interacting with you guys there. Let's go ahead and get into this story. I do need to give a warning just from the get-go that this story contains violence, it contains graphic details and sexual violence and psychologically abnormal behavior and thinking. So just let that be a warning. Today we are going into the story of Martha Moxley. It's important that we get clear on who this is, because this is not actually a Kennedy. The primary male that we are talking about is a cousin to the RFK, Joe, RFK Jr., and David that we just talked about in the last episodes. Michael Skakel is a cousin to these three. Ethel Kennedy, their mother, had a brother named Rush, and these are his sons that we're talking about. So just so we're clear on who we're dealing with here. Martha Moxley. In one of the diaries that Mary found in her suburban New York home, back when she still shared it with Bobby, he had tucked a newspaper clipping between two blank pages. The headline read, "Ethel K. Nephew Called a Killer." This had become one of Bobby's obsessions, trying to clear his cousin Michael Skakel, who would soon stand trial for murdering a teenage girl. Why? Why would Bobby risk his reputation doing this? Everyone knew the Kennedy men could be violent with women. Another cousin had been charged with rape in 1991. The girl had had her reputation smeared by them. and the trial had been televised on 24-hour cable television. Martha Moxley had been in Connecticut only 1 year when she was voted best personality in school. It would have been easy to envy her, but among Martha's many gifts was a way of putting people at ease. At 14, she was both an old soul and a young girl. She had Snoopy earrings and braces, and her father still called her by the nickname he had for her, which was Martha Dookie Pie Baby, and she let him. The Moxleys had just moved from California to Greenwich, her dad a rising star in international accounting. Now they lived in a huge house on 3 acres with a formal garden, a reflecting pool, a guest house, and for Martha, what her artistic mother called a garret. Martha's own little world on the 3rd floor with a large bedroom and a private bathroom. Martha had her own stereo and television set, a faux fur thrown on the cot for guests, chairs covered in tapestries, and a wall that she and her friends were collaging with magazine cutouts. She asked her mom to make her a quilt out of gingham checks in pastels. She lived up there with her beloved cats, Tiger and Junior. She was happy alone. She was a reader like her mom, and she was a diarist. But Martha also was a joiner. She was on quite a list of activities, y'all. Swim team, yearbook, gymnastics, ballet. She was co-captain of the basketball team. She was on the pep rally committee. She had been voted president of the Letterman's Club, all within months of a cross-country move. I don't know about y'all. I was kind of nerdy in high school. No, not kind of. I was nerdy in high school. Was academically interested, but I was also in the band and the choir. So for me to see a creature like this who can just enter a high school and within a year have dominated this many fields and won over this many people is quite extraordinary. She's quite popular. She knew how to throw a good sleepover. Martha and her new girlfriends would mix Bacardi and Coke, drink beer, and try to master the art of looking glamorous while smoking cigarettes. One of her diary pages has a little hole in it because she was trying to write and smoke at the same time like a serious thinker would do. She also had a great sense of humor. Funsy onesies was her sarcastic way of being enthusiastic. She and her girlfriends would watch movies like The Wizard of Oz or Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and then call the boys in her class and tell them which girls had crushes on them. So this all sounds very high school, right? Calling, to talk about crushes, being silly. I will say the one part, I'm like, Bacardi and Coke at 14? That feels a bit advanced to know how to mix drinks and to have access to those things. I felt like most of this sounds like a normal, silly teenage girl, flirtation, collages, her room decor, but Miss Callahan gives us enough detail that she's a little too unsupervised. She has a little too much access to resources and privacy that are beyond the bounds of a normal 14-year-old. Martha and her friend Christy would try these if you take this medicine and this soda at the same time, you're gonna die sort of combinations, and they would try it. Bellhaven was nothing like the Bay Area she was familiar with. Her new friends' fathers were people like Charles Schwab or the head of Chevron. Her friend Helen was heir to the Schweppes fortune. And then there was the Skakel house. Everyone knew that the Skakels were related to the Kennedys. Rush Skakel, the dad, was Ethel Kennedy's brother. He was brother-in-law to the late RFK, which made the Skakel kids cousins of Bobby, Joe, and David. Rush was now raising all of his 7 children on his own. Their mother had recently died of brain cancer, and Rush was having a midlife crisis. He was never really home. It was too much for any parent to handle, and 2 of his sons, 17-year-old Tommy and 15-year-old Michael, were definitely too much to handle. I have thoughts, but I'm trying to keep it all. I actually think it relates, though, a little bit to the Pamela Kelly story, so I will go ahead and open this up. Y'all, we have a lot of sons, and there are some frustrating aspects of some of these ages that are being talked about. I've watched different families struggle at this exact age, and I've struggled with these ages of sons, so it is hard. And so even though, okay, this is the moment, actually, I realize you're probably in grief and in shock, but this is the moment at which, if your kids ever didn't need you before, they need you now. So disappearing into the world of Charles Schwab shouldn't be the option you pick, right? That when you have 7 children, their mother just died of brain cancer, this is a world revolution moment for your family, where I don't know if you buy a lake house out in Missouri, I don't know if you buy the house next door to your sister and brother-in-law who seem to do a good job raising their kids, and you lean on them and get a little more help. Whatever it is, you do something, and he seemed to do nothing. So his sons, at this critical moment in their lives, are left unsupervised and uncorrected. And I'll just say, as a mom, like, these ages right here, 15, 17, and even up to the cousins, like we were talking about, 19, 20, 21, those ages are when I really need to lean heavily on my husband, because, you know, when you have a little toddler, you as a mom can manage them. They're hard, they're busy, it's complicated, but they can't physically overpower you, they can't intimidate you. And 15, 17, 19-year-old young men who are growing up, they need their dad. They need their strong hand of a father. And these kids didn't have that. Their mom had recently died. Michael, we're told, is 15. His mom has just died. He's one of 7 kids, and his dad is checked out and often gone off with rich people. Very elite rich people. School on the East Coast had an edge, and to Martha's surprise, she liked it. She was a sunny California girl with sass. She reserved her true thoughts about her teachers for her diary. I kind of don't want to read some of these. I will read a couple. She reserved her true thoughts about teachers for her diary, where she shared things like, for Christmas, Martha and her friends gave their teacher, Miss Rogers, a jock strap with its lace cover sewed on by Martha herself. There is so much here that is just weird. Poor Miss Rogers. She's not married. It's back in the 60s where MISS meant unmarried woman. And they're giving her a jock strap, a lace covered jock strap. What an odd gift to receive from students, period. Mr. Zarego is so nice. He told me a joke, but I didn't get it. How do you keep a Jewish girl from screwing? Marry her. Huh? That's what she wrote. Huh? I'm just left like, what kind of world is this where teachers would tell this kind of joke? Like, is this grooming? Is this just disrespect? Why would he be saying this to a group that includes 14-year-old Martha? I could even foresee at this time like a male teacher telling male students that kind of joke and thinking he's like getting in with them. But it just seems weird that he would have said this to a 14-year-old. Unless, I mean, was it grooming? I don't know. Y'all weigh in on whether or not I'm just out of it and this is kind of normal. This was a fancy school, but there weren't many protections for girls. Boys were always pushing Martha into dark rooms or locker rooms and holding her arms, trying to kiss or shove their hands down her pants. A boy named Kenny took Martha into the bathroom one day and turned off all the lights. She later wrote in her diary, "Why is it always me? What can you do when they have your hands and arms? Nothing?" So sad for her. Everyone knew that lots of boys had crushes on Martha, and she even talked about it in her diary, that she didn't want to hurt their feelings, but she was just trying to kind of learn how to avoid boys that might ask her out, but she didn't want to go out with them. In her diary, after chronicling one of these events, where she was trying to hide from a guy. It says, at lunch, I got pushed into the bathroom by about 10 guys. After I got out, about 3 or 4 guys picked me up and almost carried me back in, but they didn't get that far. These poor girls, is all I could think as I was reading this whole section. Like, what an environment. It's like going through a minefield every day, which is kind of what high school feels like in some ways. But I mean, a sexual minefield. Felt like they're so sexually vulnerable. She kind of has a crush on this guy named Jeff. And her friends are teasing her about it. She's blushing about it. He was kind. He was not like the other boys. Well, she tried to distract herself. There were pizza parties and house parties, movie nights, shopping with friends, going to New York City, to Saks and Bergdorf's. Martha loved Lacoste and was growing into her East Coast preppydom. So she is kind of leaving behind that California cool and embracing a preppy existence on the East Coast. Her mom gave her a $50 clothing allowance and a credit card to Ann Taylor, so she could buy whatever she liked when she liked it. At the end of 1974, she wrote in her diary, "Today is the last day of 1974. Boo-hoo. 74 has been one of the best years of my life. Well, I hope 75 is as good." That next year was a big one for Martha. She turned 15, she rode in a Ferrari, had her eye on a new bicycle, a yellow 10-speed Atala, and was fairly sure her parents would get it for her. She smoked pot for the first time, and she went to the US Open, where she got Jimmy Connor's autograph and had a blast. On a water skiing trip to Tahoe, she met a boy named Mark, who was a few years older than her. She had a nickname for him, El Foxo. One night, Mark asked her if she wanted to go all the way, and she said no, not at 14. For someone so young, she did have a sense of herself, and it wasn't based on how pretty or well-dressed she was, her liveliness, or her personality. It was more innate. She had a stillness, and it was a magnet for other kids who lacked that stillness. Kids like Michael Skakel. Martha wanted nothing to do with Michael. He was obnoxious and creepy and mean, always hovering around Martha with his dark energy, as if he could force her into liking him back. September 17th, Michael was so totally out of it. He was being a real asshole in his actions and words. He kept telling me that I was leading Tom on when I don't like him. And I said, well, what about you and Jackie? You keep telling me you don't like her, and yet you're all over her. He doesn't understand that he can be nice to her without hanging all over her. Michael jumps to conclusions. I really have to stop going over there. Just over a month later, Martha found herself grounded on Mischief Night, Halloween Eve, when all the kids in Bellhaven were running around with no school the next day. She was dying to join them. John, her older brother, was out with friends. Her dad was on a business trip in Atlanta. Her mom was busy painting in the master bedroom. It was cold outside and already very dark. Martha begged her mom, "Please, everyone else is out tonight. Don't make me the only one who has to stay home." And Martha really was such a good kid. It would only be a few hours. Undoubtedly, her mom regretted this decision. And I was one who was constantly pushing my mom to let me off of groundings, and I got away with more than I should have. I'll say it that way. I wish that I would have had to face up to the music more. It's a hard thing, though. It's a hard thing as a parent to know which kid needs those rigid boundaries and which one can handle grace and release when they've actually earned restriction to instead be granted release. It's a hard thing to discern as a parent. She never made it home that night. Dorothy was frantic. even though the idea of a child being abducted in Belhaven, which was one of the wealthiest, safest, most secure neighborhoods on the East Coast, was unthinkable. But so was the notion that Martha wouldn't come home by curfew. So at 3:45 a.m., Dorothy calls the police. 4 officers arrived at the house and they found nothing. They put out an APB for Martha and they left. But Martha had been nearby the whole time, in her yard, in the grass, under a pine tree. Parts of her scalp had been shorn off. One of her earlobes was torn in half. Her little nose was bashed in. Her face had been punctured with small holes that looked like craters. A broken bottle had been jammed inside her. One of her blue eyes was still open. Martha had bruises on the back of her upper thighs. A narrow metal shard was jammed through her neck, inches to the right of her chin. Her pants and underwear had been yanked down to her ankles. Before we go further with the story, I just want to say something we all know, I'm sure, which is this is obviously a crime of passion. When law enforcement gets to a scene and they find someone who has died of one gunshot wound to the stomach or something, that's not the same as somebody who has been hacked and clawed and attacked in this way. This is clearly, it's personal, it's sexual, and it's a crime of passion. Her friend Sheila was the one to find Martha the next morning. She ran to the Moxley house and told Dorothy she couldn't tell if Martha had been attacked by dogs or raped, but they better call an ambulance immediately. And Mrs. Moxley should not go out there no matter what. Can you even imagine as a mother? She's right out there. She's been there all night. And Mrs. Moxley, you are not to go out there. I don't know that I would be able to stop myself. What about you? Over at the Skakel house, a number of strange cars with out-of-state license plates began parking in the driveway. The murder weapon, police quickly determined, was a golf club, specifically a number 6 Tony Penna golf club. 3 pieces had been found near Martha's body. She had been hit with such brute force over and over that the club had shattered. Part of the shaft had been used as the dagger through Martha's jaw. She was covered in so much blood that the responding officers thought Martha, who was a long-haired white blonde, was a redhead. That's so much blood up around the head area. Drag marks showed that Martha's body had been moved from the place where she was killed to the tree, which was about 60 or 80 feet. She had tried to run from whoever attacked her and made it about 45 feet before she was tackled. Martha was slight, but to move a dead body that far would require significant strength, and her manner of death was classic overkill. The murderer was likely someone Martha had known. Who among Belhaven's elite would have done this? It turned out Belhaven's elite had little interest in the answer. The detectives questioned every neighbor, every friend and family that knew the Moxleys, and they all seemed as concerned as if a cat had gone missing. Dorothy, meanwhile, could barely function. Why had she let Martha go out that night? She prayed that Martha never saw the first blow coming, that she had been knocked unconscious and never felt a thing. She prayed that Martha had died immediately, which these are all things that every mother would hope and pray for these things. It took her years to accept what the autopsy found, that Martha had lived through most of the attack. Only the stab wound under her chin was inflicted post-mortem. Everyone in Belhaven was whispering about the Skakels, about Tommy and Michael most pointedly. The rumor was that one or both had killed Martha Moxley. But at the same time, the community seemed in denial. Even though the golf club used to kill Martha, police determined 18 months later, had come from the Skakel house, and in fact had belonged to the late Anne Skakel, Michael and Tommy's mother, the one who had died from brain cancer. Some of the other mothers in the community individually and often began confronting Dorothy Moxley. Why can't you just drop this? Why can't you let it go? I cannot believe that anyone would tell a mother of a murdered 14-year-old girl who had been so attacked in this way. You just need to let it go. David Moxley stopped working for a while. He never spoke of Martha. He couldn't bring himself to talk about her, the daddy's girl who loved picking out his clothes for work, laying them out each night so he didn't even have to think about it. 1 year became 2. Martha's brother John felt as if time had stopped. He had gone to a high school football game shortly after her murder, and when the announcement came over that Martha had died, John felt all eyes on him. He knew in that moment that his life would never be the same. David Moxley died suddenly in 1988. The official cause was a heart attack, but Dorothy knew the stalled investigation, his heartbreak over Martha, and the failure to arrest her attacker was what had killed him. He was laid to rest in Greenwich next to his beloved daughter. John couldn't bear talking about Martha either. It was Dorothy who became her avenger, talking to the few reporters who maintained an interest in the case. Len Levitt at New York Newsday and Dominic Dunn at Vanity Fair. Dunn had reached out to Dorothy in 1991 while he was covering the Kennedy rape trial in Palm Beach. The Kennedy strategies at play reminded him of that cold case in Connecticut, long forgotten, involving a teenage girl's murder and a suspected Kennedy cousin. Dunn was initially saddened, but not surprised to learn that nothing had happened with Martha's case. But it remained on his radar, and 5 years after William Kennedy Smith was acquitted of rape, Dunn caught a big break. He slipped a copy of the speculative document that came to be known as the Sutton Report. The same year as the Smith trial in 1991, Rushton Skakel, who was Ethel's brother, decided to secretly hire Sutton Associates, a private detective concern in New York, to investigate and to psychologically evaluate Tommy and Michael to figure out if one or both had killed Martha. So 16 years later, their dad is hiring a private psychological investigation firm to evaluate his sons. And the investigation took 3 years. Every detective and analyst was made to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Even if Tommy or Michael had confessed, that confession would remain a secret. This deep dive into Tommy and Michael's psyches was meant to help prepare the brothers for further interrogations with law enforcement. On some level, Rush must have suspected that one or both of his sons could have been responsible. According to the final report that ended up in Dunn's possession, Tommy and Michael were both deeply disturbed young men with extreme emotional swings and immature by every measure. I'm going to read some quotes from the report. Both boys are impulsive personalities. Both have poor ego development and a bad self-image. Both are sexually immature and blocked emotionally. Both have an alcohol and possibly drug problems. Both are very likable and outstanding athletes. Both are lost, personally disorganized, and have no life plan. Their only point of departure is in the fact that Tommy feels loved by his family and Michael does not. The Elon assessment also quoted Rush Skakel, their father, as saying that their sister, quote, is frightened to death of Michael. Tommy had suffered a grave head injury at age 4. It had allegedly knocked him unconscious for 10 hours. We're not told what the injury was. But afterwards, he was prone to violent rages. He once punched his fist through a door. Another time, he ripped a telephone off a wall. He had no respect for parental authority. He was seemingly unafraid of the police. The report said he was possessed of a formidable ability to lie. Among many falsehoods that Tommy told the police, the most glaring was about liking Martha. Multiple witnesses, Michael Skakel among them, reported seeing Martha and Tommy engaging in sexually charged horseplay in the Skakel driveway. Tommy later claimed that he and Martha had met up later and, he said, engaged in mutual masturbation. The report quoted Tommy's lies directly. In a passage addressed to Tommy, but also read by his father Rush, the Sutton investigators concluded that Tommy's explanation of what he told the police was too rehearsed and too proper to be believed. This is what they said to him. "We know that you lied to the police." Quote, and this is quoting Tommy's explanation to them. "They questioned me about whether I had any sexual feelings or sexual desires or any sexual activity with Martha, or whether I approached her sexually. I didn't like that because that's not like me and my family. They questioned me in pretty hard terms we don't commonly use. They questioned me many times with regard to the details of what had taken place and what I had done." So that's what he has said. And this is the investigators talking to him. "And you didn't tell them the truth. Why? It must have taken a lot of guts to keep lying to the police like that." So, even in this Sutton investigation, the people who are questioning him are finding holes in his explanations and saying, you were not being honest with the police. These investigators had hired a separate firm called the Academy Group to work up a profile of what Martha's killer would have been like. And so the Academy Group's profile of this probable offender shares many obvious characteristics with Tommy Skakel, as well as with the other leading suspects in the case. Most notably, the Academy Group believed the offender was between 14 and 18 years of age, resided within easy walking distance of the victim's residence, was in the same socioeconomic status as the victim, had regular interaction with the victim, would have exhibited strong sibling rivalry tendencies, would have experienced behavioral problems both at school and at home, and was under the influence of drugs and or alcohol at the time of the crime. So this was some of the excerpts from that Academy Group's profile of what the killer would have been like. That the offender resorted to violence, that his immaturity or intoxicated state would have left him inadequately equipped to effectively deal with the victim on an emotional level. The choice of weapon. The weapon utilized to commit the murder is one not normally associated with violence. Its use is strongly indicative of impulsiveness, immaturity, and or lack of experience in violent crimes on the part of the offender. 3. Overkill. Overkill is defined as using much more violence than necessary to kill a person. In this case, there were 14 to 15 blows to the victim's head. Any one of several of the blows would have resulted in death. Again, this is strongly indicative of anger and rage directed in a very personal way to the victim. Body disposal site. So this is number 4. The area selected to dispose of the body is not one that would be selected by a person unfamiliar with the area. They went on to cite certain characteristics for the probable offender, which to our knowledge were not consistent with Tommy Skakel. Michael, however, is a different story. It's uncanny, in fact, how closely these other characteristics match with Michael's personality, behavior, and the diagnosis of his psychological evaluations. Most notably, the Academy Group believed that the offender was sexually inexperienced, had not killed before, was a habitual window peeper and consumer of pornography, and an emotional loner. The report concluded that these behaviors were not consistent with Tommy at the time in question, but they were consistent with Michael. Maureen Callahan gives us a look at a psychological evaluation of Michael Skakel in 1977, which was just 2 years after the attack. It listed him as severely agitated with depression, overwhelmed by a sense of evil, that he was possibly depressed to the point of psychotic proportions, that he was unable to just function intelligently, but that he would have intrusions in his thinking, that he had primitive fantasy content like masks and mutilated bodies, that he had concerns about bodily integrity, and he had an inadequate capacity to attach to other people. The doctor specifically said that his impulse control was marginally adequate. His preoccupations were alarming and suggested an unusual capacity for violent thought. So now we go back to the Academy Group report. The report determined that Michael at some point had been romantically involved with Martha. This was a conclusion her family and friends rejected outright. They were sure that she had absolutely no feelings for Michael. In fact, her diary entries said that she was actively trying to avoid him. But in the theory of this case, the Sutton report suggested that Michael committed the murder in an act of rage over being sexually rejected by the same girl who had just engaged physically with his own brother. Martha had been a 15-year-old virgin. It's suggesting that she brought this on herself, that by being silly and playful with one teenage boy, that somehow she could have been a little more selective, and then she wouldn't have ended up murdered. The report starts asking pressing questions. The first one was, would Tommy and Michael try to have sex with Martha together? By this point, police and reporters, through nearly 20 years of speaking with Martha's mother, her best friends, and reading her diary, had all concluded that Martha was a confident girl with a healthy sense of her own sexual boundaries that were presumably known to both brothers. And even the Sutton report said as much. No one considered Martha to be promiscuous or inappropriately preoccupied with sexuality. Rather, her flirtatiousness seems to have been of the nice girl variety and was indicative of a self-confident and cheerful disposition. So that's what the Sutton report said about Martha. So then the question really should have been, would Tommy and Michael attempt to Martha together? And really it was Michael, not Tommy, who would emerge as their prime suspect. The report found that Michael suffered from a serious addiction to alcohol and cocaine and harbored great rage toward their father. He was a self-admitted neighborhood peeping Tom, and there was one woman in Belhaven that he stalked. As Dunn reported in Variety Fair, 2 of Michael's best friends had shunned him ever since Michael told them that on the night of the murder, he had been masturbating in a tree next to Martha's house. So no wonder their little community had this rumor mill going that the 2 boys had been connected, because he had told them that on the night of the murder, that's what he was doing. And the community, even these best friends of Michael, had shunned him ever since. Michael's story kept changing. At the reform school he had been sent to after catastrophically crashing a car, he was reported to have confessed to the murder and then recanted. So he has this moment where he's in catastrophe and he's just like, oh, now this, and and he comes out with it that he murdered her, but then recants. That's interesting. He tried to kill himself not long after Martha's death, jumping out of a car in heavy traffic on New York City's Triborough Bridge, later the Robert F. Kennedy Bridge, and he attempted to climb over the guardrail. Michael told his chauffeur that he had done something very bad and that he needed to get out of the country and that he had to kill himself. A memo cited in the Sutton report quotes Tommy and Michael's aunt, Sue Reynolds, as saying she thought Michael is capable of murder. The report also notes that Michael once went after his Aunt Ethel with a kitchen knife after he tried stealing some liquor. The morning after Martha's murder, Michael was, according to the report, going nuts over all the police presence over at the Moxley house. As memorialized in the Sutton report, when it came to Martha's murder, quote, even his own father has conceded that Michael could be capable of this, end quote. So y'all weigh in about what this is. It reminds me of O.J. Simpson. Here's what happens. 1998, it's 23 years after Martha's murder, Michael hired a ghostwriter to work on a project called Dead Man Talking, A Kennedy Cousin Comes Clean. It was explosive, but not for the reasons one might expect. In this little memoir, Michael Skakel was the hero. Here he was spilling all kinds of Kennedy scandal. He promised to tell the real story about his cousin Michael Kennedy, Bobby Jr.'s brother, who was married with children and sleeping with his 14-year-old babysitter. Most male Kennedys, Michael wrote, didn't consider this rape or child abuse, but Michael Skakel, in his retelling, he did. He was such a hero. I don't care who you, okay? He wrote, of confronting Michael Kennedy. But this is wrong. This is a kid. This has to stop. He wrote about Bobby Kennedy taking offense, not to Michael Kennedy's behavior, but to Skakel's. I don't see how that's any of your business, he quotes Bobby saying to him. Michael Kennedy's brother Joe, the one who had paralyzed Pam Kelly through his car accident, also told Skakel to back off. My brother, Joe says in this proposal, can F anybody he wants to. But the Kennedys always banded together, circling the wagons to protect the cesspool. The heart of the proposal, though, is a sample chapter titled Murder Most Foul. And this is Michael's account of the night Martha was murdered and of his feelings toward her. I thought Martha was really pretty, he writes. I really liked her. I wanted to kiss her. I wanted her to be my girlfriend. But I was going slow, being careful. I thought that maybe something romantic might develop between us. There it is. Martha, despite the Skakel camp claiming otherwise, had not been involved with Tommy and Michael. She was not trying to play sophisticated sexual head games to reel somebody in or leading these boys on. And even if she had, no one deserves murder for having done so. But even according to this telling, she was pretty, he wanted to kiss her, he wanted her to be his girlfriend, wanted to take it slow, and he's hopeful, but it's all on his side. My kids are coming in and out, so I'm gonna have to wrap this up pretty quick, but we're near the end. After they parted ways, he writes that he kept thinking about Martha even after going home and getting into bed. I couldn't settle down, he writes. A part of me really wanted to go to sleep, but I was keyed up, nervous, and horny. After a little while longer, still unable to fall asleep, I kicked off the covers and decided, F it, I'm going out. And that is how Michael Skakel ended this most consequential passage. In 2002, Michael Skakel would be convicted of killing Martha Moxley. Entered into evidence was the murder weapon, the golf club that belonged to Michael's late mother. During the trial, Michael had gotten up in Dorothy Moxley's face. You've got the wrong guy, he said. His Aunt Ethel wrote this long pleading letter, which I'm not going to bore y'all with. It is long. It's like, oh, I hope your compassion will tip the scales. I beg you to take into account the qualities of blah, 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 blah. The most eloquent she is, she says, please remember that he was born to a mother who is the epitome of a virtuous woman, whose lingering death to cancer left a bereft and shaken father of 7 unable to cope. Instead of discovering joy in his children, he found solace in alcohol, rendering him unavailable to them, leaving his family virtually abandoned. Well, that part is true. She says she has never heard him cuss or use bad language. She said that the depth of his spirituality is where everything flows from for Michael Skakel. She says by his sheer character, he overcame a difficult childhood. He had adolescent institutional abuse. His sobriety is a productive example, and she mentions a 3-year-old. This is in 2002, so he apparently had a baby in 1999. She writes this letter, and Maureen Callahan points out she never said he didn't do it. On June 7th, 2002, Michael Skakel was sentenced to 20 years to life, in large part due to Dorothy Moxley's unfaltering demands for justice. I have spent 27 years of hell and anguish, she said, trying to live what some think of as a normal life, but stressed to the limit, trying to find truth and justice. I am a victim. My son John is also a victim. John said that he was incapable of expressing the degree to which Martha's death had had an effect on his life. And he says that they are both enduring a life sentence of wondering what might have been, which is true. Whatever solace his conviction brought to Dorothy and John would not last. After serving 11 years in prison, Michael Skakel's conviction was vacated by the Connecticut Supreme Court in 2018, after his lawyers successfully argued that his former defense lawyer had not successfully pursued someone that turned out to be an impartial alibi witness. At one point in the appeals, Michael even argues that his trial lawyer ought to have attempted to accuse his brother Tommy in order to create reasonable doubt about his own guilt. The decision to vacate his conviction and free Michael Skakel was not unanimous. Justice Carmen E. Espinoza, in a blistering dissent, wrote that Skakel's station in life afforded him chances that other defendants and convicted felons of lesser means would love to have had. She wrote, quote, "Unfortunately for them, the vast majority do not share the petitioner's financial resources, social standing, ethnicity, or connections to a political dynasty." End quote. Exactly. We have a murder, we have a conviction, we have an ending of his jail time early. So while Dorothy and John go on living the life sentence of a life without Martha, Michael got off. What do you guys think about this chapter? What a fascinating story. I have always heard the name Martha Moxley. I have not ever looked into this story until this chapter. So for me, this was very insightful, very sad, very, very sad. It's just heartbreaking. So first question would be, do you think Michael did it? Seems pretty likely to me. What do you think? Number two is, I did want to talk about, what did you think about this stressful, unnatural, terrible environment for the children and teens who grew up in this Northeast rich private school crowd? It just seemed like there was so much sexual violence towards girls. There was so much misbehavior, but misbehavior happens in all kinds of schools. It just seemed particularly like a vulnerable place for a young woman to be. What did you guys think too of the fact that their own dad had this psychological report drawn up of them? That was a fascinating insight. It shows an incredible amount of money. I don't know if the purpose would be to kind of get in front of any potential legal pursuits. It seems crazy to me that 16 years after her murder, their own father went into this investigation like this. Just very, very fascinating. Our next chapter is going to start out a new section called Falling Stars, and we are going to have the follow-up chapter for Miss Marilyn Monroe. So I'm looking forward to that with you guys. I know that the first episode of Marilyn Monroe left us with a lot of questions and maybe a lot of entanglements that we know existed, but we want to see them wrapped up. So let's see how Maureen Callahan does. She has done a fabulous job for us so far, and I'm looking forward to that chapter with you guys. I hope you have a great day. Thanks for hanging with me. Thanks for sticking it out. I really appreciate you guys. You guys are liking and commenting. I will say, please subscribe to the channel. I'd love to keep reading books like this. I do have some ideas that I'm looking forward to. I think I'm going to do a documentary review of a JFK assassination related topic. And then I have other ideas, some really fun ideas of books to go through with you guys. I'm open to your suggestions. Please leave them in the comments, and I will see you soon. Bye.